In this video, we are going to be looking at arrays, how we create arrays, how we can access array values, how we can append to arrays that we've created, how we can also inspect the contents of an array and inspect the contents in a very friendly way. We're also going to be writing a function that allows us to return the specific data that we want from a particular array. Now in this example, I'm going to be looking at creating an array called levels. Essentially what this is going to do is it's going to contain 3 levels information. It's going to contain a level name and a level description. So we'll be basing this around a theoretical game where it has 3 levels and some information about a level. And the function that we're going to be creating is going to return a specific elements value. So the first thing to do, I guess, is go ahead and outline what we do when we create an array. So we need to store our array data within a variable. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a variable called levels, and I'm going to assign this the value of array. Now within this array, what we're going to do is start to add some elements, and we're going to be creating a multi-dimensional array. Now a multi-dimensional array sounds tricky and sounds complicated, but in fact it's not. All this is array or are arrays within other arrays. So for example, for a levels array, we could have 1, 2 and 3, and you'll notice I've comma separated these values. Now just bear in mind that arrays are extremely useful in programming. If you write any lengthy application or something in PHP, some kind of site, you'll more than likely use arrays, even if you don't know about it. For example, if you're returning database data using a MySQL function set, for example, you'll have that data returned as an array. Now, we won't go into that, obviously, but what we'll be doing is focusing on this array, and we'll be accessing different values from this array. And it's going to be a bit more complicated than this, but we'll see that in a moment. So I've got this array here with 1, 2, 3, and now what happens if I want to see the contents of this array? Well, if I go ahead and echo levels, now what's going to happen? Let's load up our browser and take a look. So we've got this array keyword back. Now the same thing is going to happen if we use var_dump, and this is really useful. If you have a function, for example, maybe you didn't write it, or maybe it's coming from a function set that's already within PHP in the standard library, you might not understand how it works. So you can always pass in any variable into var_dump and it will give you information about this. So in here you can see that we've got array. We've got 3 elements to our array. The first contains an integer. The second, which is element 1, I'll explain more about this in a moment, contains another integer, and the third, contains an integer. Now, arrays in PHP are 0 indexed, as they are in most other languages, so you'll always start at element 0, which will be the first element, and then you'll increment from there. So we've used var_dump to see our array and see its contents. Now we want to actually inspect the contents of the array. So we can use print_r for this. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in the levels variable, which is obviously our array, and you'll see now we'll get this out. So it tells us that at the first element it contains 1. It doesn't tell us the data type, but we know it's an int from the last, the var_dump result. The second element contains value 2, and the third contains value 3. So we've seen what our array looks like, and we'll be using print_r further on in this tutorial to sort of examine a more complex array. And we'll also be looking at a better way that we can output this within pre-formatted HTML tags. So now that we know how to create an array and how we can examine an array, you should be comfortable with returning some data from, as I said, a standard library function, for example, and inspecting that contents. So if you've ever used a method or a function that you don't know what it returns, try a var_dump or a print_r and see what the data looks like. And a bit later on, you'll see with the pre-formatted tags, it makes it a lot easier to read. So let's go ahead and make this array slightly more complicated. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pull this down and indent it, and I'm going to pull this down here and indent it the other way. So essentially now we're working within a nice space here, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same for these, but put these down on different lines. Now when we want to assign a value for an element within an array, we don't use equals, we use equals and greater than, and that basically means set the element, this element's value to something here. So we could say 1 equals level 1, for example, and we could do the same for these. So we could say level 2 and level 3. Now be careful here, because you don't want to use ending terminators like we do for the end of things like this, because that's going to bring an error. So when I refresh now, oops, we're not outputting anything. So let's go ahead and print R on levels. And let's take a look at the result here. So now we see that we've got an element with the with 1. Now that's changed from a 0 to a 1. So I'll explain that in just a moment. Then we've got 2 and 3, and these correspond, or these values correspond to their element names. Now what we've actually done here is we've set an associative array, and we've given this, or well, not really. I mean, associative array is when we have a string here, tends to be. But essentially we're saying we've got an element here. The first element of the array's label is 1. The label here is 2. The label 3 here is 3. And this is the value of this label, or this element's name. So now what we can do is we can start to build up arrays within arrays, because we might want to store more than just level 1 here. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all of these. And I'm going to go ahead and assign this the value of an array. And I'm going to do that for all of these elements. So now what we've done is we've already created an associative array. So now when we go ahead and refresh, you can see that we've got element 1, we've got an array, and at element 2, we've got an array, and the same for 3. Now in here, what we can do is, again, we can set values, or element names and their corresponding values. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this down and indent, and then I'm going to go ahead and say name, and then level 1. And then I'm going to do a comma, description, this is the first level. Now this might look a little complicated, so let's go ahead and pull this back up here. And you'll see that really it's no different from what we've done here. We've got the elements label here, or name here. We're assigning that the value of level 1. We've got another element here called description, and we're assigning that this value here. We were just laying it out in a slightly easier to view and manage way, so this makes everything look a lot better. So now when we go ahead and refresh, you can see that we've got element 1, we've got an array with another element inside called name and an element called description. So we can now access level 1's name, and we can access level 1's description. So we'll go ahead and complete 2 and 3, and then we'll look at a way that we can modify print R, or certainly output it slightly differently, and actually see this in a much easier way. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for this. We'll give element 2 well, we've given element 2 an array, and we're going to give an element called name level 2, and here a description as well. So you've just escaped that character, made it to level 2. And then we'll go ahead and do the same for 3, level 3, go ahead and assign that a value of level 3. And obviously this can be anything you like, because it's string data, it doesn't have to be, oh sorry, that should be name. And then description, the last level. So now when I go ahead and refresh, things are going to start to look a bit complicated, and it's really, from this point of view, it's hard to see what everything is and what everything does. So let's go ahead and end this part of the tutorial on modifying this, or certainly, as I said, outputting it differently. So I'm going to go ahead and echo, and in fact I'm going to get rid of this just quickly. I'm going to echo pre-formatted tags. Now, oops. Now pre-formatted tags allow us to output content in our browser slightly differently, in the sense that I could say and I could pull a line down here and say hello new line. And when I go ahead and refresh here, you can see we've got hello and new line, where if we didn't use pre-formatted tags, There's no line break here like this using an HTML BR element, so it just says hello new line on one line. So using pre-formatted tags have the added advantage of taking new line breaks and actually literally outputting them. So what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate print R, which returns, remember, the structure of the array, and we're going to pass in levels, and then we're going to pass true. So what we're going to do now is, or what will be output now, is the actual line break version of this array output. So now we can really easily see what we're working with. We know that we've got element 1 here, and inside we've got another array with a name and description, 2, 3. So if this was a massive file with arrays within arrays within arrays, we know that we can easily see this data. So now that we've looked at creating arrays and outputting arrays, seeing what's within an array, we'll move on to the next part of the tutorial where we're going to actually start to get to the fun stuff. We're going to be writing a function to return level 1's name or description dynamically. So we need to write a few lines of function to output any of the data here, which is going to be extremely useful if you're working with larger data sets.